difficulty, and we must rise with the occasion. Close quote. This quote comes from a long correspondence written on December 1st, 1862, from President Abraham Lincoln to the Congress of the United States of America. We were in the throes of the Civil War, and this is a month before the Emancipation Proclamation was written. Now, I don't want to tie where we are today to the level of the Civil War, but I do want to ask us, what is our stormy present? And are we ready to rise to the occasion? And how will we think anew, and how will we act anew so that we can accomplish the things that we need to do? Cochise College views this as part of our mission to provide educational opportunities that lead to social responsibility, constructive citizenship, lifelong learning, and clearly this becomes a key part of what we're trying to do. So we hope you'll take in the information that you hear today and begin to think anew and act anew so that you too can rise to the occasion during our stormy present and lead to calmer waters moving forward. I'm reminded of this as we start thinking a little bit about a document that I read at the turn of the century in December of 1999, if we can think back that far, a document that was produced by the Morrison Institute of Public Policy from Arizona State University. And in that, they outlined what they believed are going to be the 8 characteristics of the new economy. And for 20 years, I've used this information in many of my presentations. And as I was thinking about it today, I've started to see the reality of those things coming true. And let me just outline those briefly. The first one was technology is a given. Now, clearly you saw that today, no matter how many times we've rehearsed the technology, and no matter how many times we talk about the devil is in the detail, and we had it down to the detail, we've realized that God is in the detail, the devil is in the technology. But how we respond to that technology will move us forward. And I know the Small Business Development Center does lots of things to help you with technology. Globalism is here to stay. That's number 2. We don't need to talk about it. You're going to hear a day talking about globalism, the impact, and how we need to position ourselves in a global economy. Knowledge and skills builds wealth. We're certainly seeing how knowledge and skills prepare people for the new economy so that they can be successful. That's been Cochise College's mission since its founding in 1962. Number 4, people are the most important raw material. Now, for a long time, I wasn't sure what that was until I've seen the last 6 months when it comes time to hire. Hiring the right people at the right place at the right time. How do we do that to position ourselves to move forward? Because people truly are the most important raw material. Number 5, there's no such thing as a smooth ride. We're probably experiencing that between supply chain issues, the disruptions attached to all of that, companies right-sizing, downsizing, all of those key things have created a real bumpy ride. The organization that's able to smooth those bumps will be the one that will be successful in the new economy. Competition is relentless, is number 6. Number 7, alliances are the way to get things done. Hopefully, one of the purposes of a meeting like this is for us to get together to form partnerships, form alliances to help get things done. And then finally, and most importantly, for those of us that love Cochise County, place still matters, but for different reasons. And we need to determine what those reasons are so that our place will matter so that we can move forward. On behalf of the entire Cochise College family, our governing board, our faculty, staff, and most importantly, students, I want to welcome you to this global economic luncheon as together we try to learn how to think anew and act anew. Welcome.
Thank you, Dr. Rottweiler, and I was more than happy to provide a hands-on example of how technology can provide the devil that we encountered today. Up next, we have Rare Muller to speak for a few introduce here.
I want to start by thanking Mark for putting me right behind the doctor. This is the worst position for a speaker when you have somebody as dynamic as JD that lays out a great message. Now, I was told I'm just supposed to say welcome, so welcome. And I'll make sure we recognize the Consul General from Nogales, from Douglas here, from representing Mexico. So people may be questioning, why do we need a global conference in a little city, not quite 50,000? And what I was told from a guy from Phoenix the other day is in a remote area. Can you believe that? Well, we are part of the world economy already. We have, everybody knows about the cross-border trade that already goes on, and we're glad the borders are basically open again, so that should help. But I will tell you, I've talked to economic developers throughout this room, and we've been involved with people that have their companies based in South Korea, Holland, Canada, of course, as well as other countries around the world. And if we're going to succeed and grow and attract what I call base jobs, those are the jobs that are well paid. High in this century, they have to be very technical, and it's so that a person can live, work, and raise a family effectively. That's the only way we're going to attract some of the other jobs, the mechanics, the people working in restaurants, those kind of things, so that we can have a great community, or continue to have a great community, I should say. So I would ask you to open your minds, think globally, and please interact with other folks that are here that have specialties or backgrounds that you can take advantage of. Thank you.
We're going to do this a little bit out of sequence. I want to introduce my boss, or one of my bosses, Jim Pipper from Phoenix, from the SBA. Could we have Melanie Edwards Barton please come up? Melanie, come on. Tony Boone. Jennifer Sorensen. And is Mignon here? Is Mignon here? No. Okay. We're going to have Vida. Vida, come on up and accept this on behalf of Mignon. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, we'll do it. Anyway. She'll do it. Yeah, she'll do it. She'll do it. Here we have 4 people that I have to say it has something to do with economic development with the city of Sierra Vista. You're looking at them. So if you don't know these people, please get to know them. But anyway, I just wanted to thank them because they're what I call priceless partners. They are people that work behind the scenes to help me do the things that I do. But anyway, we were going to do this at the end, but Jim had to leave, quicker. So anyway, we're doing it now. Thank you. I can take a deep breath.
So here at the table, we were just talking before that we got started how, not so long ago, they were throwing around numbers for infrastructure bailouts and stuff, in the billions. And now we're talking about numbers in the trillions, 1 trillion, 2 trillion, $3 trillion and more, being proposed for these different plans that we have. So what exactly do these numbers mean? What exactly is a billion? What's a trillion? How does that translate to what we're doing here in Sierra Vista? Well, our next speaker, Brandon Jeter, is going to talk a little bit about that.
Hello, everyone. Okay, so my technology works. Feel good about that. So first of all, I want to thank Mark Schmitt, I think, for inviting me to do this. I'm not an economist. I'm not a business analyst. I'm not a budget analyst. And I'm like, he invited me to speak at an event. And I was like, well, speaking is what I do. And then I was like, hey, wait a minute, Mark, what am I speaking at? It's like, oh, it's the economical luncheon. Oh yeah, I have plenty of experience in that. But I think I'll be able to help you out today. So does anyone remember when a dollar was a dollar? Does anybody remember that? Now, there's some people here who may have a few more years on their life than I do, but I've been around the sun 42 times. And I remember this great time called the 80s. And in the 80s, this Southern guy right here, I was so excited to get $1. Because $1 as a little guy, I had a great time in a place called an open air market. Now, for those of you who are unfamiliar with that, in the South, it's a big building, may have 4 walls, may not, but you can get a hot dog with chili. You can get 5 pounds of collard greens, a slush, and possibly gas for less than $10. Those days are long gone. But with that $1, this little guy was quite happy because there was an aisle about 20, maybe 30 feet long, and the bottom row was a 1-cent candy. A little bit higher, we had 15-cent candy, 20-cent candy, 25-cent candy, but on the top shelf, I could get a Snickers bar for less than $1. Those days are long gone. But my favorite shelf with that $1 was the 5-cent shelf. And boy, did I have a time. And so my mom, being the wise person she was, did not let me eat candy all weekend because my life depended on it. But the dollar has changed quite a bit in the 90s. Anyone remember the 90s? Hey, I was in high school in the mid 90s. And I remember having this sandwich called a Whopper. And the Whopper was 99 cents. And the combo was $1.99. Can anyone relate? Can anyone think back that far? Anybody? Again, I was a happy camper. I got my first car in 2000. And I remember filling up for $1.24 a gallon. And that was premium gas because I had a V6 engine. The dollar is still here, but what we do with it has greatly changed. Still about 6 inches by 2 inches. But what you can do with it has changed significantly. So I want you to think about $10,000. If we had $10,000 as $100 bills, the distance from your last knuckle to the tip of your thumb, that would be $10,000 in $100 bills. How many of you have pockets today? You have pockets? You could fit $10,000 in your pocket. But I left that over here. Let's still talk about $100 and stacks of $10,000. And if you want $1 million, you could carry it here. $1 million could fit in this bag. Please stay at your seats. There is not $1 million in this bag. But there's this new buzzword that's going out now. Usually when we hear it, we think Bezos, we think Musk, we think Buffett, and several others. And it's called billion, a billionaire. $1 billion is 1,000 million. So can you imagine 1,000 of these in here? Take up all the floor space in here. That's $1 billion. But in our economy, the new buzzword is trillion. trillion. But before we get into trillions, anyone here interested? Would anyone fight or argue with their boss if they said, look, we're only paying you $1 million a year. That's it. How many of you would argue? How many of you would throw in the towel and look for another job? Okay. So there he is, Dr. Rottweiler, president of Cochise College. Sir, can you run this campus off $1 million? Yes, sir. Says no.
One pay period. Actually, not even the full pay period.
Not even a full pay period to run this campus. So we're not even talking the Douglas campus or the campus downtown. But no one complained about $1 million as salary. So we've been introduced to the law of relativity. Now, I'm not talking about what Edison was doing with E equals MC squared, but relativity, when it comes to everything's value, comes from relation to another thing. $1 million for salary, great idea. We're all for it. $1 million to run this campus, he can't go a pay period. So we're getting familiar with these numbers. The $1 trillion issue. That's 1,000 billion. Can anybody really imagine that? We're talking about if you stack money in $100 bills taller than the World Trade Center, that would be $1 trillion. If we took $1 trillion and we had them all in singles, and we stretched them out end on end, we're talking about 96.9 million miles of money. That's further than here to the sun. Trillion is the new number, and it's not going away. I remember back during GFC, it was a big commotion about how much money they were looking to spend. And it wasn't quite $1 trillion. And they fought and they argued, and I think it ended up around $750 billion. Outrage, we can't do this, it's unsustainable. And then another election cycle happens, and another election cycle happens. And now, how many $1 trillion packages have we passed since 2017? And it's not going away. But if we make a decision in our minds, we're going to need more money to do the things we used to do. So we have to stretch our mindset to actually believe that we're capable of being millionaires. And there's a hush that went around. Has anything gotten cheaper? Is there more stuff? You know, that old supply and demand thing? Is there more stuff going on? Well, there's a lot of stuff. Most of it's off the coast of California right now. So I think I might go there for Black Friday. Get me a rowboat and see if I can find some great deals. The dollar is still the same size, but its buying power is a lot different. And soon, we can very soon get to a place to where millions and billions are just small numbers. I remember as a kid, if someone was actually a millionaire, we're not talking 300 or 400 million, just having $1 million was amazing. Wow. Now it's like, oh yeah, that's called 401k, and I hope to retire on it. And they're changing the numbers. This isn't Dave Ramsey dollars anymore. This isn't a $1,000 emergency fund. We just found out during COVID-19, $1,000 is not a good emergency fund at all. 6 months pay built up for a long-term emergency. We found out how fast 6 months can be. once the pandemic lasted more than 6 months. So I want to encourage you, keep stretching, keep believing. Your businesses have so much possibility. Don't limit yourself and keep striving for more. Thank you.
So where are all these billions and trillions of dollars, and how do we start to get some? I think Mark Schmitt can talk a little bit about that.
I'm going to talk a little just about the numbers globally around the world, kind of to set up our keynote speaker. Basically, the first thing I want to talk about is world population. This is actually today from the US World Clock. We have about 333 million people in the United States. If you take a look on the right-hand side, that's over the years is the population. I'm a 70s guy. By now, we were actually supposed to have more people on the planet because of the huge population growth that we were going to go out of orbit. As you can sort of see, the world population growth has actually decreased from what we thought it was going to be. And over to the right, or yeah, I guess it would be your right, you see the population projections have actually down, I honestly believe, before low 4%. As we become more developed of a country, our population around the world seems to decrease, not increase like we thought it was going to. The most interesting thing is if you look in the middle here, where the laser thing is a lot of people don't realize the United States is number 3. We're number 3. Okay. Look at number 1 and number 2. There are over 1 billion more people in those countries than what we have. But look at number 4. You see all of the countries that are basically ranking just below us in the 300,000 kind of range, or 300 million, excuse me. But anyway, this is the 20 largest countries in the world by population. And I don't think a lot of people really realize that big gap between China and India. Now let's go forward is projections for world population increases in fertility rate. Once again, as countries become richer, our fertility rate declines. And there's where we're at right now as far as world population by age. A lot of people don't realize that the United States average age is 37. Okay, over there in Asia, it's actually just a little bit less. The largest country with the oldest population is France. At 44 is the average age. But look at Africa. The average age is only 17. And so that tells me when you take a look at how many people in the room need a new toaster? Not many. Let's go to Africa. How many people need toasters? Probably quite a few. So we see some huge potential for increase in their economy. It's called Prosper Africa. And by 2050, they're actually guessing that will be one of the larger countries consuming goods. But this is even more glaring when we take a look at under 15, Africa, 40% of their population. Okay, in the United States, North America, 18% of our population is under the age of 15. Now, the other side of over 65, take a look at the United States, 17%. Once again, back to Africa, less than 4% of their population is over 65 years of age. Now we're going to get into the cost of living. We're going to talk a little bit about that. What we've done here is we've actually taken the index of the United States as $1. Okay. And it actually shows that the monthly income in the United States is about $4,500. Okay. Now let's go to China. The average income in US dollars is $884. Now we talk about purchasing power, or the purchasing index is in the United States, it's $1. Those same goods in China would be 26 cents. And so here's some of the listings of some of the other countries as far as purchasing power related to average income across the world. And this is the top 30 countries. And so you can pick out your favorite country and take a look to see how we rank up as far as cost of living. I have some more slides that are going to talk about that. This company, Travel, they actually took a same plate of food and went to inexpensive restaurants around the world to say, what would that cost in Switzerland? Well, that same plate cost $27. In Pakistan, it was $1.48. And so you can sort of see the ranges. In the United States, that plate of food cost $15. And so the same plate of food in relationship to these other countries in an average inexpensive restaurant, you can sort of see what it costs. Now we took the top most expensive cities in the world. And it's really interesting. I went a little bit further, is the median income in Sierra Vista. It's in the middle there. It's kind of being hidden by that slide there, but it's 59,000. This is Tokyo. And the last one is New York. And we did comparisons of medium income, gallon of gas, and a one-bedroom apartment, just to sort of give you an idea from New York to Sierra Vista to Tokyo in those three things. And if we take a look at the most expensive cities, the top 10, the United States, we actually came up with New York and Los Angeles. We're in the top 10. The most expensive country was Zurich. And they were actually in a tie with Paris, France, and Hong Kong, those three countries. So anyway, that's kind of in relationship to the cost of living, medium income, and how far does that dollar that he was talking about go? Now we're going to talk a little bit about jumping around quickly to cover more things, is what does the world produce? And we're talking nominal GDP. And this is the formula for nominal GDP. It talks about private consumptions. That's the things we consume. Private investments, companies making investments in companies, government spending, and then net exports. So we're a country that we actually buy more products than what we sell. So we're negative in our exports. I'm going to show some slides later on to show you countries that are positive in exports, but that's what nominal GDP is all about. It's kind of the private consumption, private investment, government spending, and net exports. And this is the nominal GDP per capita. So that takes what we produce as a country divided by what our population is. And if we take a look here in the United States, we're in the $60,000 per person range in the blue. Australia is in the blue. And then we start going over into Asia, and they're down around to the, I would say, $10,000 limit as far as what they produce per person. There's some high earning countries, of course, in the United States, Australia, and then, of course, in the northern here with the Netherlands and Denmark. This is the GDP estimates in 2050. And so once again, they do have India surpassing the United States and China overwhelmingly beating everyone. I think an interesting one is number 4 here is Indonesia. And what's going on there right now is cheap labor producing a lot of stuff. Now we're going to talk quickly about production. What do we make? This is the world's largest manufacturer. As far as 28% of the global manufacturing is done by China. United States is number 2. Then we have Japan and Germany, number 3. Then we go into some of these other countries that have how do I say, been around for quite a while and producing a lot of stuff. Germany is really an interesting one to me, and I'm going to show you later on another slide as far as like net exports and imports, how well they fare. And this is manufacturing compensation by hour. United States, we're at $40, and we go down to India's made a lot of stuff in the news lately where they're actually about $1 per hour for manufacturing. So no wonder a lot of stuff moved there. This is agricultural. And this is an interesting thing because when you look at, and I'll show you on another chart, what actually is bought, sold, and traded, agricultural products is usually number 10. Okay, it's usually manufacturing, machines, plastics, or things, pharmaceuticals actually beat out the export and import of food. But China is the #1 world producer of food. And 5 years ago, they were worried that they couldn't feed their country. And so what's basically happened is the United States has introduced some technology as far as machinery, equipment, and different types of seeds, and it's brought their production up quite a bit. The United States is #2. This surprised me that Brazil was #3 as far as a country is the largest producer of food. India is #4, Russia, and then France. I think an interesting thing for the United States is that we've had a 5% increase in production every year. We're using less and less land, but it's more science and technology is producing agricultural products. But this is an interesting thing is the global production of plastics. We are huge consumers of plastics, and you can see from the 50s up to today, the amount of plastics that we consume, and that usually runs #4, #5, or #6 as far as like the most traded thing in the world is plastics. Now we're going to get into the top producers of minerals. And the most interesting one is I think a lot of people didn't know or know, the last couple of years in fossil fuels, natural gas, petroleum, the United States, we're #1. We produced more oil and petroleum than any other country. The interesting thing here too, that everybody's pining for, whoops, I think we got shut off. There we go. More technology. Australia, lithium for batteries. Everybody wants that. But anyway, it tells you some of the top producers. Aluminum is China, bauxite, Australia, copper, Chile. We go over here to nuclear fuels. That's kind of interesting. Gemstones, China, Russia, diamonds, platinum, South Africa, palladium, Russia. And so until we start mining some asteroids, these are going to be the largest, how do you want to say, producers of some of these minerals. And that's all going to change. This to me was the biggest shock of the whole pandemic thing. And I never would have imagined this. It's the day I heard that the price of a barrel of oil was like minus 11 cents. Remember that? And what that was all about is they had these tankers paying storage fees that couldn't get into the ports because they were closed. And the people that owned this oil said, please buy my oil. They would actually pay you money to buy the oil. It didn't last very long, but there was a period of time, to me, the biggest shock. When did you ever think a barrel of oil would be in the negative number? Never. I never thought that would happen. But now we're actually, it's kind of funny. I heard on the radio the other day is we were actually paying at this time for gasoline almost $1.50 less than what we're paying now. It's gone up that much. But anyway, crude oil price today was $80.88 was today's price of crude oil. But that to me was the most amazing thing, was that the first time ever the price of oil dipped. That was my most shocking thing for the pandemic. But anyway, now let's talk about imports and exports. This is the leading countries that import goods. And of course, once again, the United States, we're #1. This is 2020, okay? China is imported #2. But now we go to the other side of the chart here is who exports countries, and that's China, #1, United States, #2. They overtook us about 4 years ago. For the longest time, the United States controlled that space, and now we've actually been overtaken. But anyway, these are some of the other countries that talk about how much they're importing and they're exporting. Germany, I want you to pay attention to this, is take a look at, they're actually importing and they're exporting. And there's a difference there of about, I can't see that one. About $200 million in difference. And they always rank #2, #3 on the charts as far as the negative or positive import and export of goods. And I think that's the next slide. Net exporters. These are countries that actually sell more than what they buy. Okay. These are countries, and we're at the bottom here, we actually consume more than what we actually make. The United States consumes 94% of everything that we make, whereas Germany, they actually export 75% of everything that they make. And they've been doing that for years. This is some of the biggest exports around the world and what countries export products. And so once again, we lead in petroleum products. The green is produce. You can sort of see soybeans. The medical, look at where the medical is coming from. It's kind of interesting. And metal, a lot of metal is coming from Australia. But anyway, that's kind of a global who's selling what. Now let's get into US import and exports. This is actually the balance of trade in the United States. Once again, the blue line is stuff that we export. The black lines are the dollar volume of what we import. And this actually puts it in comparison. The red, we actually have a trade surplus in services. Okay. And the blue is the goods. Okay. And we're actually negative. We actually buy more than what we sell. And that black line is actually the trade balance, imports minus exports. And these are some of the services, for instance, Cochise College. If someone comes from another country and comes here and attends school, well, they're spending their dollars here. Okay, so that's actually counted as a service. Other things, financial services, when let's say an entertainment group goes to another country and performs, that's a service. We're kind of a Cochise, not a lot of manufacturing going on here, but we have tourism. And so when we have tourists come here to visit from other countries, that's actually a service that we're actually coming out positive on the trade balance. We're actually receiving more money than what we're spending. This is our top exports in the United States. Machinery is number 1. Electronic equipment's number 2. Spacecraft number 3. And look, there's our old plastics, number 7. Petroleum is number 5. And we have pharmaceuticals at the list. You notice agriculture isn't on here. They're number 10. And this is worldwide exports. Once again, this is what we buy. Once again, we buy machinery, electrical equipment, we buy vehicles, we're buying pharmaceuticals, minerals, not just oil, but other minerals that we're using, bauxite, stuff like that. And then of course, precious gems. And that's an interesting one is furniture. We actually import a lot of furniture from a lot of other countries. Debt, let's talk quickly about the US debt. Everyone's overly concerned about that. And this is a US debt clock as of the first of the month. And this is the US debt, the national debt. And what's amazing to me is let's compare some other countries as far as their debt. And the line that we really want to look at is a percentage of their GDP. The United States, 98 cents or 98% of our GDP is debt. Whereas look at Japan, 276%. And so that if we took everything that we consumed in a year, we could pay off our debt if we spent everything that we could make on paying off the debt. But it would take Japan a while. But you know, China has some debt too. To me, this was the most interesting thing about the debt is who owns our debt. I'd always heard, yeah, China owns our debt. No, they don't. They own a huge portion of it, but Japan actually owns a larger percentage of our debt than China does. This is my last slide, and it doesn't mean that the value of the US dollar is number 9, but this basically is saying that if you want to buy a dinar, and these are all backed by oil producing countries, $3.30, you'd have to get 3.3 of these to get $1. Okay, and so we're actually, when you rank that out, is a US dollar, you would actually spend $2.66 to get one of these. Okay. Anyway, that's kind of the end of my show to basically talk about global trade, the economy, the world. And I hope there was some surprises for you guys as far as understanding what our population is, what we're going to become, and understand the importance of international trade. I didn't talk about this on a slide, but the United States has 14, what you call treaties with other countries. And that's the whole idea, is to have a trade agreement so there aren't tariffs. Mexico has 44 free trade agreements. And I remember when we were shutting down, Mexico was saying, come to Mexico and we'll show you how to export to the world. And so that's the whole thing with global trade. It's understanding relationships. Somebody does something better someplace else. And so that's a lot of what the free trade agreements are all about, is to break down those barriers so we can actually have free trade to trade globally. Everyone in this room last year actually spent $7,700 on products from other countries. Some people say we actually saved an average of $10,000 per household because of being able to buy products cheaper from other countries. But anyway, thank you.
So a lot of information for us to digest, a lot of facts and figures that we need to try to make some sense of. And our next speaker is going to help us do a little bit of that. Chris Rafferty.
Thank you so much. Mark, thanks for inviting me to come here, and thank you all for attending. I thought I'd start with a little story, since we're talking about the significance and what a dollar could buy. And let's take it back even further, back to the early 1920s. How much do you think the average American made per day back in the 1920s, early 20s? Any guesses? $5 a day. Rough average. Per capita income was about $100 a month in the US back then. Primarily, you had about one person in each household working. So you do a little bit of math, 20 working days in a month, it was about $5 a day. But you could get by on $5 a day. The median home price was under $1,000. You could buy an automobile for the low to mid hundreds. If we went back, I would have loved to see what a plate of food would have been, but I would assume a plate of food would have been much less than nickel candy that you were buying at the open air markets in the 80s. So bottom line is, the dollar does change in value. Now, let's say you were an investor. I work for an investment firm, and you wanted to buy a share of a company like General Electric. What do you think it would have cost to buy a single share of General Electric back in the early 20s? Change, right? I'm hearing change, nickels. $232.25 for one share of GE stock in 1924. You want me to stand a little closer? Thank you. $232.25. And the stock market was different back then. You couldn't just buy a single share. You had to buy in round lots of 100. So essentially, if you were a working American, you had no chance of investing in the growth of potential companies through stock ownership. Enter in three real innovators in Boston, where so many great innovations from our country's history started. They worked at Harvard. Their last names were Leroy, Adams, and Carr. And they came up with this concept. What if we pool money together, and we pool money from various individuals together, we professionally manage it, and we go out and we buy baskets of stocks, and we offer fractional shares of ownership. And in 1924, these three gentlemen were able to raise about $50,000, and they created what was called the Massachusetts Investors Trust. And what that was essentially a combined investment in the 45 biggest companies in America at the time, General Electric being one of them. Why I describe them as revolutionaries was, with $1, you could invest and get 100 shares of this investment. This was the first mutual fund ever created, and it was really one of the greatest forces of democratization of wealth in our country's history, because now for the first time, virtually all working Americans had the opportunity to invest in stocks and participate in the growth of companies. It also changed the way that companies view us and view our capital. It made them recognize if they could encourage more investors, more owners, they would have more money that they could then invest in their business to create profits and growth. And so that's why today, outside of maybe a couple of tech stocks or maybe some of these financial stocks, almost every stock is affordable to a working American. I mean, now you're talking the average stock price is about $30 per share in today's dollars. So why do I start with this story? Well, no one in this room for the most part has probably ever met me except for a couple of you. And you're probably wondering, who is this gentleman named Chris from MFS and what is MFS? Well, MFS stands for Massachusetts Financial Services. We're the company that created the Massachusetts Investors Trust. So we invented the mutual fund industry. We now manage about $650 billion worldwide. We're one of the top 10 largest money managers. And my job is to really be a liaison. So I'm based out of the Phoenix area. I've lived out here with my wife and 4 children since 2010. So we've been out here a while. And my job is to basically be the liaison between our 400 investment professionals who are located around the world, who are meeting with corporate executives, world leaders, trying to figure out where we think the best companies and opportunities are to invest, and then share that information with all of the financial advisors that we work with and do business with in the greater Southwest area. So we do not sell any of our investments directly to the public. Don't worry, this is not a sales presentation. This is an information. None of you can directly go and buy our products. We work exclusively through institutional clients and broker dealers, but that's how our relationship with our next speaker was formed. We work very closely with Edward Jones as one of the broker dealers that's very prominent in this town. We manage about $80 billion for their clients. And I'm really the person that tries to make sure that all of those advisors are offering the best advice and best products. So I spoke on a virtual presentation, probably, I don't know, a couple months ago, early summer months, and was invited to come back and do this in person. It's so much more fun to do this in person. I thought the biggest topic, if I was a business owner or just somebody consuming the news on a daily basis that people want to hear about, is inflation. You know, inflation and interest rates really seems to be, especially with the report that came out a couple of weeks ago, which states that we are now at a 6.5% inflation, which is the highest number we've seen since 1990. So 31 years since we've seen an inflation number this high. So that's really where I'm going to focus most of my comments. But please feel free to ask any questions. We can take this off tangents. We can talk about the stock market, the global markets, or any other information that's on your mind. But I figured, and this was the slide deck. I work in the world of compliance where almost anything that I say or do has to have 1 million attorneys check off on it. So this was a slide deck that I thought incorporated most of the content that I want to discuss today in this brief time. So what we're going to talk really about there is the mega highway of interest rates. So I kind of came up with this idea when I was traveling in Los Angeles. Any of you have ever been in the Los Angeles area on those freeways like the 405 or whatever it is? I mean, you've got these freeways, you've got 8 lanes of traffic going northbound, 8 lanes of traffic going southbound. And I kind of wanted to steal that concept to talk about what really impacts inflation and interest rates, because there are pressures that have caused our interest rates to go up in the last 12 months, that have caused the rate of inflation to go up as we've seen in the last 12 months. And yet you'll hear the central bank, our Federal Reserve, say, we think this is transitory. We're not going to raise rates. And that's because they feel that there's more secular long-term pressure that's causing rates to go lower. And so that's what I'm really going to use as the thing. So first, we're going to talk about what has been causing our interest rates to come up. Why is inflation at 6.5%? First one, as Brandon alluded to, fiscal spending, right? How many trillion-dollar packages have we passed just since 2017? I lost count, but we're probably at 4, maybe on 5, and they're trying to get another maybe 3 to 5 trillion more on top of that. But fiscal spending certainly has the potential to be inflationary because it puts more money in the economy. This fiscal spending that was done in this to kind of as a response to this pandemic was even more inflationary because it really put a lot of money in the actual pockets of everyday ordinary Americans. Now, I know a lot of that also went to corporations, but this bill put money in people's pockets. That leads to or has an effect on interest rates. It puts pressure on them going up. If there's more money to spend chasing fewer goods, prices go up. So that's one of the things that's leading to them up. The Fed's changing approach to inflation. For years and years and years, the Fed always had their mandate was to try to preemptively get in front of inflation. As soon as they thought that maybe we saw an uptick in inflation, they would raise interest rates, or they would cut the money supply, or they would use some of the tools at their disposal to get in front of that before inflation actually took hold. Last year, Fed Chairman Jerome Powell changed the language. It had a huge impact in our world, in the money investment. Most of us here in normal life, it didn't really impact my own life, but certainly as the way Wall Street looks at it, because what they said was that they're going to they suggested that they were going to let the economy run hot. They weren't going to preemptively try to impact inflation like they would have in the past. They were going to kind of see how things were going. And now they just mentioned a couple of weeks ago that they're going to start to taper. And I'll try to bring this language down to earth for people who aren't in the world of finance. So one of the things that our central bank has been doing since the start of the pandemic in early March of 2020 was something called quantitative easing. You've probably heard it mentioned on the news or read about it. What quantitative easing is they're basically created money and they're putting it into the economy by buying treasuries, buying our loans, buying mortgages, or by direct lending it to our banks and financial systems. To put that number in context, since we've been talking a lot about numbers, they have been averaging $200 billion per month in quantitative easing. And they've been doing that in order to keep the economy going. We've never, ever gone through an environment or an atmosphere where we basically just said, we have to all shut down. We can't leave our homes. We got to shut down our businesses. Don't spend money unless it's being delivered to your house. That's what we were told. And that's what we did to kind of try to stop the early spread of the pandemic, especially before the vaccines came out. And so the Fed knew that if they didn't do something really aggressive, our economy was going to fall off a cliff. And so that's where they did this. But of course, we're still doing it today. And they just mentioned in their last meeting that they were going to start to taper. And people in Wall Street said, oh no, the Fed's pulling out, because Wall Street and the stock market has become very dependent on the Fed's assistance. Well, what they're going to start with is cutting it to $180 billion a month, which is still a humongous number. We're still on life support. If you think about it as an analogy, is like you're driving down the highway. We've been driving at about 150 miles an hour down the highway. Now they're just going to kind of tap the brakes to make it 130. Still speeding well above the speed limit, still a very extreme measure, yet you might have heard some things in the news. But this has caused pressure on inflation and caused pressure on interest rates. Base effects. What that basically means is that the inflation number is measured every single month over the previous 12 months. Well, what's happened this year? We've been basically rolling off months in 2020 where we had the lowest inflation numbers maybe in our lifetimes because of the pandemic. And we've been replacing it with months in 2021 where we all have wads of cash in our pockets. We all have this pent up demand because we felt like we lost a year of our lives and we want to go out and spend money. So part of the reason that the inflation number seems so much higher is just because we're rolling off some really bad months, historically bad months, and we're replacing them with historically good months. Final thing, as I kind of alluded to, is the pent up demand. Right? Part of the reason we have this inflation in this rapidly growing economy is a reaction to what we lived through in 2020. This here shows the average saving rates as a whole for Americans. You can see going back to 2017, in general, as a collective group, we had about $1 trillion in savings. That's been the average over the last 5 to 6 years. Look where we were heading into the time when most of us were probably getting our first vaccines. We had 4.5 times that amount. We had $4.5 trillion as Americans in our savings accounts. Part of that was because the government was giving us money. Part of that was because we really didn't have a whole lot to spend money on the previous 12 months. And so we had a lot of money sitting there. You couple that with the fact that many of us didn't do vacations in summer of 2020 like we might have. Many of us weren't out eating. Many of us weren't out buying new clothes. We weren't really doing a whole lot with our money, and we wanted to make up for lost time. And it's basically led to what I put down there, a 6-month Mardi Gras, New Year's Eve, and 4th of July all put together. That's the spending environment that we've been in since I'd say about May or June of this year. And that's what's led to such a rise in inflation. That's what's led to, some of the growth numbers that we're getting. I would argue that our GDP growth is probably going to finish the year somewhere between 6 to 7%. We are not as a structural economy, a 6 to 7% GDP growth. That's probably the highest number that we'll ever see in our lifetimes for the US economy. Now, it might continue well into next year, but it's not the new norm. Our norm probably should be around 2 to 2.5%, where we sat for most of the previous 15 years coming out of the global financial crisis. And that's probably where we're heading back to. Now, another thing that's caused inflation, as we've been talking about and as we've been hearing a lot about more recently in the news, that I think is going to certainly have an impact next year, has been the supply chain issues, the rise in gas prices. I mean, when gas on average goes up $1.50 a gallon, that is a direct input cost that impacts basically everything that we buy or consume as an economy. That's going to cause prices to go up. And if we have the money to spend, we'll keep filling those tanks. Now, let's talk a little bit about the southbound. Why is the Fed not overly concerned with inflation? Why is most of Wall Street not really buying into this 6.5% inflation really becoming a long-term issue? Well, first one is the labor market. As we know, the labor market, we're having a very hard time getting people, all of us in this room are in small businesses. It's very difficult, probably the most challenging time in our entire careers as attracting people to come in and work. Why is that deflationary? The number one cause that will lead to secular, persistent inflation is a dramatic increase in wages. Because without the money to spend, Americans will now be left with choices. Right now, we still have a lot of money to spend. We're still living off the savings that we accumulated last year. And so if we want something, we'll buy it. I had a car dealer. I've got 4 kids, so I've got to have a big car. I have a Chevy Suburban. We tend to lease them because my kids beat the heck out of it. And every couple of years, the guy at the dealership will call me up and say, hey, we've got a new one coming in. We can get you out of yours early and make the math all work out so it's pretty even split. He called me, and I was just joking. He actually called me because it was my birthday. And I laughed with him. I said, I thought you were calling because you had a good deal on a new Suburban. He goes, yeah. He goes, we are selling the Suburbans right now at 30% over MSRP. And that's if we can get them in. Why can that happen? Because people who want the Suburban today have the excess money in their account. And even though it might not be the wisest financial decision at the time, they're able to make that purchase. That, in our opinion, can only persist if the wages continue to replenish those savings accounts. What happens once those savings accounts get drained down to their normal levels? If we're not getting money from the government, or we're not making a lot more money in income, we're not going to be able to pay $30,000 over MSRP for the Chevy Suburbans. And therefore the prices will come back down again, or will normalize. I hear a lot, especially depending on which news networks I'm tuning into, and I watch them all just because I'm curious. A lot of comparisons of Biden to Carter. There's a lot of comparisons out there. Part of it is because Carter was the president when we ran through a pretty inflationary period. Remember, we had the 10-year treasury at 16% 40 years ago. Those of you who were buying homes back then, you probably paid 13, 14%, maybe higher on your 30-year mortgage rates. Inflation was really high, and it was a secular issue. Now, a lot of people like to blame President Carter for that issue. And maybe some of the policies that he was a fan of contributed to that a little bit, but he in certainly no way was responsible for the inflationary period. The reason that we had such an inflationary issue, why prices were going out of control, was because we had the single largest one-time increase in U.S. household income that we'd seen in generations. What do you think led to that increase in income? Any guesses? Women entered the workforce. So imagine if you go from a household where you pretty much have the man is the primary breadwinner, the woman is, taking care of the home front. Now she decides to enter the workforce, even if her compensation is not comparable to her husband's. That's a one-time significant boost in household income. What does that mean? You now have more money to buy houses, to buy cars, to buy clothes, to go out to eat, etc. That is the thing that I have yet to hear on any news network talked about why we had such runaway inflation in the 70s is because women entered the workforce, which was a good thing, but it created a little bit of a dislocation to the equilibrium between supply and demand, because now there's a lot more money in the system that could get spent. I would argue that there is nothing in the immediate horizon that would suggest that we're going to see a huge boost to individual household incomes in the US. The base effect rate that I described for why we have higher inflation numbers is going to start to reverse, because as we get into next year, we're going to be rolling off some of these explosive months of the summer where we were all spending like we had just gotten let out of prison, and we're going to be replacing them with our normal spending patterns. Debt, demographics, and digitalization. I just kind of went with the D theme there. But if you think about debt, we talked about it. We've been talking about it throughout the course of today. Debt is actually deflationary, because what you're doing is you're pulling forward future growth today. You're basically saying, I want growth today, so I'm going to borrow from the future and realize it today. To try and put it in context, imagine if someone was foolish enough at an institution to lend us $5 million to buy our dream house. Now, we could live in that dream house today if we could get that loan and we could have the big mansion. But what that's going to do is it's going to dramatically change what we can spend in the future, because for the next 30 years, we're going to have a $25,000 or more a month mortgage. And so that's money that we're going to be using. That's essentially what the debt levels are today. So debt is actually very deflationary long-term. Demographics. I mean, we saw that slide. Outside of sub-Saharan Africa, the rest of the world is rapidly aging. Aging populations are deflationary. As we get older, we tend to have less people to produce new goods, and the primary consumers of goods, which is that older generation, tend to consume less. So the demographics, and it's not just the US. In fact, I would argue that because of immigration and because of our relatively high fertility rates, given the state of our, developed economy, we have some of the most envious demographics. I mean, we have this generation called the millennials, which we all like to make fun of, but in reality, the millennials are our savior. That's where our long-term economic growth is going to come from. Now you've got the average millennial is, I want to say right around 30 years old. In the next 5 years, that is going to be tremendous potential GDP growth for our country, because what do most people do in their 30s? That's especially the current generation. That's when they tend to settle down, create a family. And all of us who have kids know that when you have young kids, you don't have the luxury to save. You are what's called forced into consumption. You get paid and that money goes straight back into the economy, because that's what diapers and food and formula and minivans and suburban homes cost. And that's what we all want to do. So we are really lucky here in the US. And if we're in a business that somewhat caters to that, we've been going through this funky transition where we've been going from the baby boom generation, which had been historically our largest, as they are retiring. This is actually the year the youngest baby boomer will turn 65 this year. So now the baby boomers are pretty much retired for the most part, or they're in Washington running the country. And, the millennials are entering stage right, and they're ready to come in and consume, because they want to have kids and they want to buy homes. They want to do the same thing the baby boomers did in the 80s. So I'm really hopeful for economic growth, but I don't think we're going to see a runaway inflation. Digitalization is just technology. Again, another theme that's kind of been coming through this whole presentation. I know Missy's going to talk a little bit about some of the disruptions of technology, but technology, believe it or not, is very deflationary. I mean, I would argue, I don't have it in my pie, left it at the table, but the smartphone might be the most deflationary device ever invented. I mean, it replaces literally dozens, if not hundreds, of other things that we used to have to purchase. It gives us instant pricing power at the palm of our hands to know what we can buy and where we can get it for the cheapest. Technology and the efficiencies that it creates actually is deflationary. So if we look at these two sides, fiscal spending, the Fed's unprecedented amount of quantitative easing, some of these really low months rolling off and being replaced with all-time high months, and the pent-up demand that we all lived through this year, do those seem like long-term issues or short-term issues? And the reason that you hear the word transitory thrown around quite a bit is because many of the people that are running our economy believe that these issues, which have led to this temporary increase in inflation, temporary pressure on rates, although our rates are still relatively low based on our history, would argue that these are more short-term. The long-term secular trends that we're going to be dealing with as an economy are more in the southbound lane. And so I certainly don't want to suggest that we're not going to continue to see higher inflation next year. I think inflation is going to be an issue next year, and I think it's going to be more on the supply side. I think the supply chain is going to take some time to catch up. It will catch up. Remember how we used to all talk about lumber prices? It was in the beginning of the year that every time you open the newspaper, they talked about lumber prices. Well, no one's talking about lumber prices because they're at the same price they were 12 months ago. They went straight up 400%, and now they came straight back down. Well, why were lumber prices so high? Combo of Americans have money. They haven't done any work on their homes or built new homes. They want to start. They're feeling good about life. And the border with Canada and the US, where we get most of our lumber, was still very problematic due to COVID. And those mills where they get the lumber were shut down for 4 months in 2020. So there was a backlog. But because of technology, because of the borders reopening, at least for trade, that supply and equilibrium came right back into balance, and it's not a story that's talked about. I believe that over time, the next big one will be the chips, right? The reason we have a shortage of cars is because there's this little chip that they need, or hundreds of these little chips, I should say, that they need in order to control the computer system of the car. We've seen chip shortages in the past. What happens is the cars are being built. I mean, the rest of the car, the hundreds of parts that go in to make the car are available and they're being built. They're just waiting for these chips to catch up. Historically, when there's a chip shortage, what happens is then there's an overreaction to the opposite side and we overbuy chips. And so what's going to happen is we're going to go from a car shortage, chip shortage, to probably an overabundance of cars, an overabundance of chips. So if there's one takeaway from today, unless you need a new car today, wait a year or two, and I think you'll be able to get them for a much cheaper price because the chip supply will catch up. I just use these as a couple common examples, but ultimately the supply chain is gonna fix itself. It's going to resolve itself. The other area where we have a shortage of is labor. And it's not that we have a shortage of people, but we have a shortage of people that have been incentivized to actually take on the jobs that we're all offering. That's a trickier one to kind of forecast, but I do believe that with the millennials coming of age, with that generation starting to get more serious and wanting to kind of build the lifestyle that they grew up in, I think you're going to see fewer challenges in the labor shortage. I also think that obviously there's going to be a tug of war in Washington, but I don't think that it's going to be as feasible or easy to live a relatively modest existence fully subsidized by the government if you're in your 20s and 30s. And so I do think over time, this might be the longer one to fix itself, but I do think the labor issues will get solved here eventually. So my kind of conclusion for today is inflation is real. It's high. It's going to continue to pose a challenge for small business owners, for all of us as we get into next year. But I would not lose heart and think that this is the new norm. This is not the late 70s. What's leading to these issues are short-term in nature. And ultimately, what's anchoring all of these numbers long-term are these more secular issues that I kind of discussed. I do have some time for questions. I kind of kept it pretty narrowly focused on inflation, but I'm happy to answer any questions if there are any out there. Yes, sir. That's a great question. And I'll try and summarize it in case you didn't all hear it. Back in 2011, it was a huge news story. It caused the market to almost lose 20%. S&P downgraded our debt from AAA to AAA minus. And the question is, given the huge ramp up in our debt since that point in time. Some of the sluggishness we saw in the economy. Why has our debt not gotten further downgraded, or when will it? I don't think it will, because it's kind of relative all other levels of debt. Right now, S&P still believes that through taxation or through the Fed's ability to just print money and create money, that we will be able to pay back our debt very effortlessly. Not to mention that slide that Mark showed, which shows that really who's buying our debt? Well, we're buying a lot of it, but so is Japan, so is China, so is Australia, so is the UK, so is Russia. And basically, as long as the rest of the world is willing to invest in our country by lending money to us in exchange for pretty minuscule rate of return, our debt will be fine. And I think that's the state of where we're at. I mean, maybe down the road, it could become an issue, but if you look at the global web of which country owns whose debt and where it's all, it's a complete mess. At some point, it's just going to have to be restructured. When you talk about debt levels that we're at here and debt levels everywhere, I mean, you can't grow or tax or cut spending your way out of it. It's just going to have to be at some point levelized, but we will be, because of the consumption base of our economy and because of the ingenuity in our economy, the technology that our economy produces, will be the last domino to fall in that scenario. And it's not the bright expectation. I'm saying worst case scenario where we become to have some real issues with money supply, we'll be the last domino standing, because the value and what the world believes in as it relates to the US is that we are great consumers. We love to spend. We're hard workers, and we have the economy and the political environment that allows for the most creativity, ingenuity, and business ideas. And that's what we've always kind of fallen back on. That's that hope that the president of the college was talking about. I mean, if I'm going to cling to some hope in the present time, it's the millennial generation coming on board. And it's the fact that we still have the freest political environment and the freest environment to build and create a business. And that will help us grow our way out of it. Yes, sir. Yeah, the questions around digital currencies, Bitcoin, Ethereum, et cetera. What is the role in the short-term economy and where does it play a long-term? There's a lot of, I mean, if you heard Jamie Dimon or some of these heads of banks, they're kind of dismissive around cryptocurrencies as being a real viable currency. Cryptocurrency is here. It's a technology. To me, the most viable part of the cryptocurrency is the technology behind it. It can be used for so many sources behind it. Now, what it's being used for today, or what we're hearing about, is basically people who are on the internet all day kind of trading it, and there's not a lot of value in it. There's basically only value because someone is willing to pay you for that value. There's still a lot of challenges. I would be very hesitant to build cryptocurrency into a key fundamental part of my investment portfolio at this point. There's still a huge threat of government regulation, and that's going to happen. I mean, we're starting to see it in Australia. They're going to figure it out here too. So there will be regulation. What is the impact of regulation on crypto, the price, the value, et cetera? Number two, similar to where we were in the late 90s with the tech bubble, a lot of the demand for crypto is this fear of missing out. It's not because there's any real tangible value or earnings or growth behind it. It's basically people are like, well, I don't want to miss out on it, so I'm just going to buy into it. And there's a number of these coins that are just complete Ponzi schemes, you know, or basically, you know, there is no value behind them. There's no technology behind them. There's no value behind them. The only reason they're worth what they're worth is because somebody's willing to pay it. And it's a very highly manipulated market. You're seeing celebrities, whether it's Tom Brady, Elon Musk, I mean, you name it. There's people now that are being backed by these currencies, these cryptos, because they know if they put it out on Twitter or they kind of put it out on their Instagram feed that they like Dogecoin, that's going to cause people to want to buy it. Whenever I see behavior like that, I tend to stay away as an investor because that's very speculative. But in the long run, there's some tremendous technology. We could do a whole conversation just on crypto, and I'd have to bring in one of my analysts, CV Rao, because he's far smarter than me. He's the one that we kind of have do these topics that are really complex. But I mean, it's going to change the way that deeds and records are kept. It's going to change the way that passwords are kept. There is remarkable technology behind crypto and behind some of these coins. And that, I think, is going to be the longer lasting legacy. I think a lot of the euphoria around it today is just being propelled by people's fear of missing out on the next big thing. And I think it's also a lot of Americans didn't really work that much for 18 months. And we all want to figure out how to retire quick. So we think, hey, we just put 10 grand in Bitcoin. Maybe I'll hit the jackpot and I can just continue living the lifestyle that I have. So I think it's a little bit about that too, but that's a great question. Any other final questions before we bring up our final speaker? Well, thank you so much for your time and attention today. And again, Mark, thanks for inviting me to come out.
Well, we started off today with a little bit of disruptive technology, and we'll go ahead and finish off with our final presentation with a talk about a different kind of disruptive technology and what it means for our global economy with Missy Nunez.
Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Missy Nunez, and I am a financial advisor here in Sierra Vista with Edward Jones. I am super excited to be here speaking with you guys about my topic. We are going to be covering technology, some disruptive technologies that have really taken into effect the last 2 years, as well as the future and what that really means to you in your everyday lives. Now, the first thing I want to ask, and this is going to be the interactive piece, who here has been on a Zoom meeting in the last month? Now, next question. Who here knew what Zoom was 2 years ago? Well, still quite a few of you. You were ahead of the game. Good job. The average American did not know what Zoom was. They may have been invited to some WebEx conferences here and there for companies that were not face-to-face. But really, with social distancing and with the lockdowns, it has changed the way that we live our lives, the way we connect with friends and family, the way we just conduct everyday business. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the innovations that have been spurred by the pandemic. A few of those are telemedicine. E-commerce is another big impactor that has changed the last 2 years. We buy everything from groceries to cleaning supplies to the new pair of sweatpants that we need for those Zoom meetings. All right. So some of the new technologies that have helped us get back to the workforce safely, that have really grown the last 2 years, we have thermal imaging technology. This allows us to be able to enter our workplace. They scan us. They can see if we have a fever before we even realize that we may have the virus. MIT has also created a new way of sanitizing using UVC lighting. They have built it into robots, so they can sanitize entire rooms in short amounts of time without even having workers there. So it ups the safety of employees that used to be in charge of cleaning, as well as make sure that we're all safe as parishioners for those businesses. Another area that's been impacted is 3D printing. We have developed ways of 3D printing masks, vaccine testing, as well as other PPE. Now, I'm going to dive a little bit deeper into what the rapid pace of technology really has done for us, the new markets that have been created due to these opportunities, as well as daily life reimagined. All right, so progress is fundamentally driven by new ideas. The development of those ideas are often dependent on resources devoted to them. So here I have a graph that is showing what we have spent on research and development. Now, these are the 4 largest economies that are focused on this. You can see the gray is what we've spent in 2000, and the blue is what we have spent. Sorry, try to get this. The blue is what we have spent in 2017. We have tripled in current dollars from 722 billion to 2.2 trillion in research and development. So what that means is that we're coming up with new ideas. We're coming up with new ways of doing things. You can see here patents from 1985 to 2018 have been on a very, very steady high increase. Now here we have different companies. These are when these companies were created. We can see the different years down at the bottom here. Now this right here, these blue lines are recessions. We can see here the companies that have been created during the recessions. We always think that when we're having issues with the economy, you're having trouble, that it stumps our growth. It really doesn't. The best ideas and the best innovation come when we are in the most difficult of times. So looking at the past few decades, the rapid acceleration, we had Wi-Fi in the 90s. In the 2000s, it was a decade for new apps and new devices. We had cloud computing, we had artificial intelligence, and we had 4G networks. During this time, the US, we also had our longest bull market on history. This was all during recessions. Difficult times definitely opens the doors to more valuable and long-term opportunities. I want to point out a couple here. We've got Airbnb and we've got Kindle, Venmo, and Square. These are things that have changed the way we do payments as well as the sharing. We've got room sharing. We've got all kinds of different sharing that back in the day, we used hotels. We didn't use Uber. We used taxis. So they have created new markets. So consumers downloaded a record of 204 billion apps in 2019 alone. And this is where we get into some of the other avenues that have become big the last 2 years. So here's ride sharing. In 2012, the taxi industry was valued at 2.4 billion. In 2019, the ride sharing industry was valued at 85 billion. In a 7-year period, this has upheavaled the taxi industry and created its own brand new market where the everyday individual can just go out, hey, we need a side hustle. Let's go get an extra job and start driving people around. It's become the everyday second job. We've also got food delivery. Before the pandemic, if you wanted food delivered, you really had a choice of pizza or Chinese takeout. There wasn't really a lot of different options. Now you can get on your phone with a tap of a button. You can have whatever you want. You can have someone go to the grocery store for you and pick up stuff to make a salad. It's really interesting how that has changed the way that we look at eating out. Entertainment, mobile gaming. Revenue is higher for mobile gaming on your cell phones than on PC games and consoles combined. Also, during the past 5 years, the number of podcast listeners on smartphones has more than quadrupled from 8.5 million in 2014 to 36.3 million in 2019. Really, our cell phones have become the center of everything that we do digitally. Now, new markets, visionary leaders, and innovative companies don't come about necessarily when times are good. These quality companies all have one thing in common, and that's that they were founded during recessions. Now, they're leaders of their industries, and they're not going anywhere anytime soon. Now, innovation is more than just the latest technology or gadgets. We have advances in medicine, agriculture, communications, finance, energy, transportation, and education. All have helped to make us more prosperous today than we ever have been historically. So we can see here, we're wealthier than we've ever been in the past. An estimated 140 million people per year enter the middle class. A larger middle class with more money to spend on goods and services translates into increased consumer spending. In fact, consumer spending is expected to increase by 203% by 2030. Health, wealth, and education, they're all interconnected. So innovation is sometimes thought of as the antithetical to job creation. The concern being that the more we move towards innovation and technology, the less jobs we have. That's not the case. Innovation creates jobs. It just changes where we allocate those jobs. So the majority of Americans today are not working on farms, railroads, or telephone operators the way that they were in the past. As economies advance, as our economy advances, we're going to see more knowledge-based occupations in the world. That's healthcare, technology, and renewable energy. So daily life reimagined. What does that look like for you? So innovation touches everything that we do on a consistent and daily basis. We're going to talk a little bit about grocery shopping as the biggest thing. I know that that's a major task that we have to do every week. Most of us probably don't enjoy it. And over the last 25 years, there has been very little innovation in the grocery shopping world. You may remember when you had to make a list. You had to drive to the store. You had to get all of your items. If you have kids in tow, you have to watch them touch everything, yell at them, get them wrangled back in. Get in line, wait in line. If there's only 2 cashiers open, then hopefully you have your phone and play with some of those mobile games. And then once you get in your car and you're gone, what about that one thing you went to the store for and you forgot? Now, with a click of a button, we can go on. We can create a running list. We can shop at any whim, have it delivered, have it curbside within just a few hours. Now, what's next? We've got robotic shuttle pods and drone delivery being innovated as we speak. Kroger has already launched an unmanned grocery delivery pilot program in Scottsdale, Arizona. So that's Fry's. We have a Fry's, thankfully. So maybe one day we're going to be seeing drones dropping off little bundles of joy, grocery joy. Now, Walmart also recently filed 97 new drone delivery patents. So they're upping the ante as well. So that is something we can be looking forward to. Now we're going to take a look back at 2019 and review what our economy and shopping and e-commerce was before the pandemic. So retail sales as surprising as it is, was only about 14% was made online in 2019. So it was a steady and slow growth. There was a core population that utilized online delivery quite often, but there was still a lot of people going out and doing face-to-face shopping. Now, some sectors were just getting into the e-commerce space. So we had furniture, we had food and delivery, and we had auto. Fast forward to 2020, and we can already see how COVID has changed our shopping habits online. Now, e-commerce is more than the giants that we know of Amazon or China's Alibaba. Every time an online purchase is made, there is a vast infrastructure that's behind the scenes to fulfill those deliveries. So we have search engines, we have retailers, we have payment systems and logistics operators, and they all play a vital part in the e-commerce ecosystem. Now, innovation is also transforming the way that we pay for goods and services. Before, when you wanted to buy something, you had to make sure, do I have my cash? Do I have my wallet? Do I have my checkbook? Now, we primarily focus on debit, credit cards, and even the mobile wallet. If you don't have your wallet, that's okay. You've got your cell phone. You've got your lifeline. Please don't lose your cell phone, though, because then you might be a little lost. Next, we've got biometric scanning. Imagine you go into the store. They scan your face. They listen to your voice. They've got your thumbprint. That is on the horizon for how payments are going to be going forward at some point. Now, throughout history, humans have relied on some sort of payment system to purchase goods and services we've needed. Back from the bartering days, all the way up through trading gold, silver, copper. Here's where we are right now. Credit cards, online payment. Chips came out in about 2015, and we're transitioning away from that already to the mobile wallets. And then up to biometric. One thing in common, humans always like convenient and transactional ways of conducting business. Now, mobile payments, since that's what we're focusing on in 2021, 2022, globally, mobile payments have become more commonplace. We're trending to hit $1.3 trillion in mobile transactions. In 2020, we hit 1 trillion for the first time. That was 3 times more than the number of mobile transactions that we've done since 2016. All right. Now, payment preferences. We're going to look at some of the biggest countries in the world and see how we differ in payment processing. So, United States, we're still bank-centric. We're still card-based, even though we are transitioning to more of the mobile side of it. It's still based on your bank account. China has transitioned. They have skipped this and gone straight to QR codes and non-bank platforms. Kenya, almost half of their total transactions for the entire country were based off of mobile transactions, so not even face-to-face. So we're also going to talk a little bit about how the technology and innovation has impacted healthcare. So, for example, let's talk about the common physical exam. In the past, we make an appointment, we go to the doctor, we put on the silly paper gown, let them poke us, prod us, run all their tests, and then they give you a nice little piece of paper and a manila envelope, and that's your results. Make sure you keep it, otherwise you're going to have to go back. Now, we can wear wearable technology. They can save our test results in what we call patient portals. We can access that at any time. We know what's going on. We can pull up our history if we have to go see specialists. Next, and we've already started transitioning into this, telemedicine. How many of us have utilized that over this last 2 years? We can go and see our doctors. If we have to see specialists that are 3-4 hours away, guess what? Hop on a 20-minute Zoom in your sweatpants and you're seen. Now, innovations in healthcare are not just on the digital side of it. And this is the part that I am most excited for. And COVID has really brought us light years the last 2 years to figure out some of these technologies. So we're going to look at a few examples of how innovation is transforming healthcare on both the patient and the doctor side. So AI, artificial intelligence, is being used to identify skin cancer. You can get full body screens and they can determine if what you have is precancerous. Robotics are being used to replace missing limbs and even helping those who have been paralyzed regain some normality to their life. 3D printing is revolutionizing organ transplant as well as tissue repair. They can use 3D printing to create skin for burn victims. Portable and wearable, ingestible and implantable devices can monitor health information for personalized treatments. My 7-year-old daughter, she's type 1 diabetic, and she has 2 little machines that she puts on her, and we're able to track exactly what her blood is at all times, as well as with a touch of a button on my cell phone, I can give her insulin. It's like it's made a major change in how I know I personally deal with life and how a lot of people in the world dealing with those things can. For doctors, blockchain, that leads back to some of the technology that we're talking about, not necessarily crypto, but blockchain. We're using that as technology ways of being secure with information, patients' information, medical information, and doctors are transitioning to make it easier to be able to share information back and forth with the patients. 3D printing is being used to customize surgical instruments. Big data and analytics are being used to identify patients who are better candidates for some highly targeted therapies. As well as virtual reality is being used to help train surgeons and help them be more accurate before they even make a single cut. So today we covered some key trends and innovations that have really taken hold the last 2 years, and I believe that will help to lead to a more prosperous tomorrow. So I'll close by saying thank you so much for your time. Thank you to all the previous speakers. And if anyone has any questions, let me know. Thank you so much.
One last thing before we go, we randomly chose this morning from the list that everyone registered a door prize. I always love Dan Vayella and Hispanic Chamber of Commerce. Shout out to him. He always has door prizes at the end of his deal. And so we have a door prize that we want to give away today. And I brought down someone that I'm working with, and we're going to meet some businesses this afternoon on that other part, social media. She owns a company that she actually goes in and does a social media, I want to say, dive on what your business needs. But anyway.
Thank you, Mark. My name's Jessica Badowski. I want to thank Dan. He's frequently inviting me and including me in a lot of things down here. So I own Two Busy Gals. We've been in business for 14 years doing social media consulting. And what we're offering today is a deep dive marketing audit. So what we do is we go in and we look for your company as if we were Jane or John Q. Public. How do we find you? What do we find out about you digitally? And then we provide an hour consultation. So normally this would cost $500, but today we're going to give this away to one lucky winner who is randomly chosen. And I'm so excited they were chosen, Mark, because I want to know more about this. And now I'm going to know a lot about it because I'm going to find everything out digitally. It's Tiny House Solutions, Keith and Tracy. That's you? Yay! Awesome. Thank you so much.
But anyway, thanks again for coming. Thanks again for JD and our mayor and everyone that attended today. Have a great afternoon.